ECB keeps rates unchanged at 2%. Netherlands plans to ban imports from Israel. And IEA expects higher supply and surplus in world oil market. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin. We begin with Europe as the European Central Bank has left interest rates unchanged at 2% as expected, but offered no clues about its next move, even as investors continue to bet that more support will be needed as inflation dips below target next year. Moreover, fresh ECB projections show that inflation is now seen at 1.9% in 2027, below the 2% projected in June, and core inflation is seen at 1.8% then, both below the 2% target. Still in Europe, the ECB President Christine Lagarde has stated that higher tariffs, a strong euro and global competition will hinder growth this year, but the effect should fade next year. She stated that the bank is not a predetermined path and will continue to assess data at each meeting.
Higher tariffs, a stronger euro and increased global competition are expected to hold growth back for the rest of the year. However, the effect of these headwinds on growth should fade next year. We continue to be in a good place, but we are not on a predetermined path, and we will take stock, meeting by meeting, to look at the data, all the data, the outlook, the projections, the many data that we receive, in order to make sure that we stay in a good place. Risks to economic growth have become more balanced. While recent trade agreements have reduced uncertainty, a renewed worsening of trade relations could further dampen exports and drag down investment and consumption.
Dutch Foreign Minister David Van Wiel has revealed the government plans to ban imports of goods produced in Jewish settlements in Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories over Israel's plans for the West Bank and its military offensive in Gaza. Van Wiel told Parliament that he had instructed his department to draft a government decree on import ban, saying the measure would be implemented as soon as possible. He also noted that Netherlands also supports the European Commission's plans to suspend trade-related measures in a European Union agreement with Israel. Moving on to Asia, the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers has reported that for the first 8 months of the year, both China's auto production and sales surpassed 20 million units for the first time. Production reached 21.051 million units, a 12.7% year-on-year increase, while sales grew 12.6% to 21.128 million units. The new energy vehicles sector was a key driver of this growth, with production surging 37.3% to over 9.625 million units and sales jumping 36.7% to 9.62 million units. NEVs now account for 45.5% of all new vehicle sales. Additionally, auto exports increased by 13.7% year-on-year to 4.292 million units, with NEV exports soaring by 87.3% to nearly 1.532 million units. Vice Commerce Minister and Trade Representative Li Zhengang has stated that China would implement policy measures to stabilize foreign trade and make efforts to resolve difficulties facing trade firms. He noted that the country will endeavor to create a positive external environment for enterprises to explore the international market. On another note, Bloomberg reported that China is preparing to tackle the significant backlog of unpaid bills owed by local governments to the private sector, estimated by some at over $1 trillion. Still in Asia, government data has shown that Japan's wholesale inflation accelerated in August on steady rises in food costs, highlighting sticky inflationary pressure that may keep alive market expectations for a near-term interest rate hike. The corporate goods price index rose 2.7% in the year to August. Food and beverage prices rose 5% in August from a year earlier, faster than a 4.7% gain in July, suggesting that stubbornly high food costs will keep inflation elevated. Electricity, gas and water bills fell 2.9% year-on-year in August, due in part to government subsidies to curb utility prices. Additionally, an index measuring yen-based import prices fell 3.9% in August from the previous year. And in South Korea, the central bank's semi-annual monetary policy report has shown that the effects of a cumulative 100 basis points in interest rate cuts since October 2024 have yet to be fully felt due to economic uncertainty. It added that the rate cuts will start to raise economic growth from the second half of this year. On U.S. tariffs, the central bank noted that the levy's domestic impact was limited, and in the first half of the front-loading of the shipments and firms bearing higher costs, but that it would become clearer going forward. The bank further noted that the housing market in the capital city was cooling, with household debt growth slowing. It was too early to assess if it was in a stabilizing trend, as risk factors remained. These remarks from the central bank's report are in line with the comments of the board member Lee Soo-young, who emphasized the need to reduce interest rates to support economic growth while being mindful of financial stability risks. She noted that the board should assess the effects of recent housing market policies and the impact of accommodative monetary policy stance on expectations of home prices as it determines the pace of easing. On tariffs and Sino-Mexican relations, Mexico's economy ministry has announced that it will raise tariffs on automobiles from China and other Asian nations to 50% as part of a broader plan to protect domestic jobs. The overhaul will impact an estimated $52 billion worth of imports across various sectors, including textiles, steel, and automotive. Economy Minister Marcelo Ebrard stated that measures are within World Trade Organization limits and are necessary to help local companies compete, as Chinese cars are entering the market at what he called below reference prices.
Pero no estamos planteándonos un acuerdo de libre comercio en este momento. Importación temporal de calzado terminado.
In response, China's foreign ministry has firmly opposed being coerced by others and restrictions imposed under various pretexts.
中方始终倡导普惠包容的经济全球化，反对各种形式的 单边主义、保护主义以及歧视性、排他性措施，坚决反对在他人胁迫下以各种名目对华设限，损害中方的正当权益。我们会根据实际情况坚决维护自身权益。
Moving to Latin America, the Brazilian Central Bank will offer up to $1 billion through $2 auctions with repurchase agreements on September 12th. The bank's monetary authority revealed that the simultaneous auctions aim to roll over contracts maturing on October 2nd and will start on September 12th. It added that the repurchase is set for February 3rd or March 3rd next year, depending on the auction. Cuba's National Electric Union has stated that power was slowly being restored on Wednesday evening on September 10th on the Caribbean island after the grid collapsed. State-run media reported that airports and essential services such as hospitals and water pumps were up and running thanks to backup systems. However, the vast majority of the country's 9.7 million residents remained in the dark. The grid failure follows a string of nationwide blackouts since late last year that plunged Cuba's frail and antiquated power generation system into near total disarray. The Labor Department's bureau has reported that U.S. consumer prices rose more than expected in August, while the annual increase in inflation was the largest in 7 months. Although the numbers will not prevent an interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve next week in the midst of a weakening labor market. The Consumer Price Index rose 0.4% last month after increasing 0.2% in July. In the 12 months through August, the CPI advanced 2.9%, the largest increase since January after climbing 2.7% in July. Additionally, in another grim sign for the U.S. labor market, jobless claim applications jumped to their highest level in almost 4 years last week, virtually assuring that the Federal Reserve will cut its benchmark interest rate next week. The Labor Department reported that the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits for the week ending September 6th rose by 27,000 to 263,000. That's the most applications since the week of October 23rd, 2021. It's also the biggest week-to-week increase in almost a year. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov has stated that the Kremlin does not calculate the dollar exchange rate as currency fluctuations are market processes. He noted that the President Putin has repeatedly pointed out the ruble fluctuations benefit either exporters or importers, so some market participants always gain from the changes. Peskov added that the overall macroeconomic situation in Russia remains calm, reliable, and predictable despite the turbulent global economy. Global markets showed semi-collective gain on Thursday, with U.S. and European indices showing broad. Meanwhile, the Asian indices were mostly up. In the U.S., S&P 500 futures gained 0.79%, Nasdaq future increased 0.66%, and the Dow Jones futures jumped 1.27%. In Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 climbed 0.6%, Germany's DAX rose 0.16%, and France's CAC 40 was up 0.59%. Additionally, in Asia, Japan's Nikkei 225 hiked 1.22%, the Shanghai Composite rocketed 1.65%. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index declined 0.43%. In the commodities sector, the International Energy Agency (IEA) reports that global oil supply will increase faster than previously expected, driven by higher output from both OPEC Plus members and non-OPEC Plus countries. The IEA forecasts supply to rise by 2.7 million barrels per day in 2025, an increase from its earlier projection of 2.5 million barrels per day. This could lead to a growing oil surplus by 2026. The IEA noted that while sanctions on Russia and Iran could constrain supply, it's being offset by higher OPEC Plus output, potentially leading to bloated oil balances. However, the agency also cautioned that geopolitical tensions and new sanctions could still disrupt the market and prevent a surplus from forming. Oil prices fell on Thursday, pressured by concerns over softening U.S. demand and broad oversupply that offset threats to output from conflict in the Middle East and the Russian conflict with Ukraine. Brent crude futures were down $1.13 or 1.7% at $66.36 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures lost $1.16 or 1.8% to $62.51. For further analysis, we're joined from Amman by economist and specialist in oil and energy affairs, Ahmed Shubaki. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on the Economic Bulletin. Firstly, sir, let's start off by asking, how will the faster than expected global oil supply growth in 2025 impact the oil prices and the market stability in 2026?
For sure, in the name of Allah, it will affect the oil has a problem, and the change in oil, and in its beginning, the tariffs from the American president, all of these questions in the oil world find difficult answers, and the vision is somehow difficult. And what's in the market, and the market need after the change of the consumption way. There are different visions to affect the world organizations. and the 250,000 this year, and it's almost the same in the upcoming year. But there is an expected, which is this year 727, and the upcoming year will lowers. And this is the difference between the 2 years. The International Oil Organization that resembles the consumers believe that the need for oil in 2040 will lowers, and it will be near to 2030. This is the latest news for 2030. OPEC believe that the vision is different, and the world is always in need in oil in the upcoming years, up till 2050.
So what are the potential economic effects of a surplus when it comes to oil supply on both OPEC Plus and non-OPEC Plus members and the producing countries in general?
Sure, all of the countries that produce oil try its best to change its economy and its strategies to a better economy away from oil. It tries to depend on another economy, because not to affect its money and its. After 2 years from the Russian-Ukrainian war, which affected different countries, and this year most countries witnesses lowering in its economy, which what we see here. But according to the consumers, I think the prices are lowered this year, and it reduced the inflation and to lower the interest.
So how might the ongoing or the new sanctions on Russia as well and Iran after the IEA's forecast and global oil supply dynamics be affected? If new sanctions enter into the idea of Russian oil, will this affect the markets?
For sure, the Russian war on Ukraine. Do you mean the Russian war on Ukraine?
No, the sanctions on Russian oil that are being implemented now. You know, Donald Trump is, for instance, attempting to get the EU to put tariffs on countries like India and China who are importing oil from Russia. Do you think this is going to affect supply in general and Russia?
For sure now, after the sanctions on Russia and after the markets were affected after the meeting, the American President Trump and Putin in Alaska, the markets wanted a change and to end the sanctions on Russia and to get oil back to the market, but it didn't happen. And there are pressures on the Russian oil. So this led to a pessimism in lowering the costs in this period. If Russian oil was deprived the world from, and China will benefit from that if there is not stopping the sanctions in Russia.
Okay, well now you talked, sir, a bit about the idea of tensions globally speaking. Now, in what ways could these geopolitical tensions disrupt the projected surplus when it comes to the oil market's balances next year?
I think the international market is changing by tariffs that Trump imposes. We witnessed a stop between Russia and China, and there are many countries that has high customs Brazil, India, and all of that affect the international economy and the interest from the American federal in an indirect way wait for the result of the tariffs in America. And the American tariffs became indirectly the affect many products.
So how will increased OPEC Plus production influence the global energy market and OPEC Plus member economies going forward?
OPEC has a different vision. There are a meeting today to define OPEC's policy in the upcoming period. The OPEC says that there are growing need for oil and the international economy is strong. And it began a second period, and it has optimism regarding the world needs, and it finds an increase in markets. It can held it by if there is lowering in the Iranian oil.
What role could the trade policies play in either mitigating or exacerbating the market imbalances caused by changes when it comes to the oil supply?
Where we talk about OPEC policy from a side and the international economy and the result of the American tariffs, all of these factors affect the world and the oil market. And there are different the economic increase in the world and what affects the international economic market, such as interest. And the markets affect the international economy and the production of OPEC and the production of other countries and some geopolitical tensions that can stop or ban some of oil market, such as in Iran and partially in Russia and other places.
So how prepared is the global community in general if all markets and consumers are not going to receive the anticipated oil surplus, or it falls short and doesn't materialize? How will this affect global markets in general?
السوق العالمي. I think that it has different political and economic and social effects. Political, this situation led to, for example, meeting of Shanghai protests and the country's union to defend the American policy. Its policy in tariffs and sanctions is less in its effect on such countries.
Sir, your point is clear there, but I have to cut you off, sir. Thank you so much from Amman. That was economist and specialist in oil and energy affairs, Amir Shubaki. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your insights. Now back to the news. The gold prices pared losses on Thursday, holding at near record highs as soft U.S. jobs data outweighed concerns from firmer inflation data, with investors still betting on Federal Reserve easing interest rates next week. Spot gold was down 0.2% at $3,632.99 an ounce. Bulletin had hit a record high of $3,673.95 on Tuesday. U.S. gold futures for December delivery fell 0.3% at $3,671.50. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. ECB keeps rates unchanged at 2%. Netherlands plans to ban imports from Israel. And IEA expects higher supply and surplus in world oil market. This brings us to the end of the Economic Bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok on the handle @QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching.